Hello everybody, this is Jordan with TrueHumanity here. I think today is going to be an excellent video, and it may also turn out to be a little longer, but I believe this is a great hinge point here, and I'm going to discuss what I mean by that in terms of our foundation and groundwork of the catastrophes of the Younger Dryas to what we see in the emergence of civilization in Sumer, etc. So I'm making this video to act as a bridge between the ending of the Younger Dryas period, roughly 11,600 years ago, the beginning of this solar-induced Dark Ages period, and through to the founding and rise of the Fertile Crescent civilizations roughly 5,000 years ago. So in this video, we will discuss what SIDA is, the Burckle Crater event roughly 5,000 years ago, and a potential accompanying event not much later which may have brought about the demise of the Sumerians, and will finally set the stage where we can begin to go into these ancient civilizations and topics related to that in future videos. So this inter-catastrophe period is aptly named the Solar-Induced Dark Ages, or SIDA, S-I-D-A, by Dr. Robert Schoch, which roughly encompasses the period of about 11,600 years ago to 5,000 years ago, that period between then. And I tend to agree with the naming of the SIDA period, Solar-Induced Dark Ages, and we'll discuss in the future as to why I agree with that. But seeing as how Dr. Schoch was the key to uncovering the erosional evidence on the Sphinx enclosure, which almost solidified, it solidifies the dating of the construction to at least the time period of the Younger Dryas 12,000 years ago. I believe if anybody should have the rights to naming an epoch in human history, it should be Dr. Schoch. So I want to give some kudos to him, and kind of support that, because there is a lot of evidence to show what we're saying here about solar-induced dark ages, which I'll kind of shorten throughout this video, calling it SIDA, S-I-D-A. So, in future discussions, as we build this story, I'm going to come back around to discuss the ending of the Younger Dryas, and how we can discuss that within the context of ancient civilizations and their architecture, and why it's so mysterious. So, this video will serve as a great bridge between the Younger Dryas, the following SIDA period, and through to the rise of civilizations about 5,000 years ago. So even though we're skipping almost 9,000 years ahead from the end of the Younger Dryas to the founding of these Fertile Crescent societies, there's still a lot of material and evidence to be discussed later within the SIDA period. So within this SIDA period, or Solar-Induced Dark Ages, which were roughly between the years of 11,600 years ago and 5,000 years ago, we don't see a lot of major activity or massive civilizations arising in that period, at least those that we can examine in comparison to Sumeria and the following post-Burckle impact civilizations. So this was a very interesting time, and I believe many mysteries still exist to be uncovered here, and I'll attempt to cover some of those later on down the road. So, to briefly set the stage, within this SIDA period, we do see hunter-gatherer evidence of activity, especially within the fertile mother goddess figures that are found across ubiquitously during this solar-induced Dark Ages period. And I believe that this represents the regrowth of nature into an Eden-like oasis on Earth. And I'm not the only one who believes this, but because the events that ended the Younger Dryas were so violent, whomever was left had to get underground, undercover, in shelter to escape this oncoming energetic force that was impacting our planet. Whether they had to get underground in caves, some other way, just to escape this exposure, this force of the energy. And we can see an example of this escapism in Derin Kuyu, which is the underground city located in Cappadocia region of modern-day Turkey. And ironically, it's not far away from the site of Göbekli Tepe. So there's other things I want to touch on here, and I'm not going to get into that, but I just wanted to bring that example in to show you that there is examples of what possibly these survivors during the ending of the Younger Dryas had to endure or had to do to survive. So, a brief SIDA period human activity overview, we're able to see examples such as the rise and fall of Jericho, the city of Jericho through SIDA, which is modern-day Palestine in the Middle East. Early on and through most of this SIDA period of 11,600 to 5,000 years ago, humanity barely got into settlements or any major civilizations for that matter. Just, you could look at the landscape, it's not there, the evidence isn't there. So, we do see within the Bronze Age the re-emergence about 4,500 years ago that Jericho initially begins farming practices during this solar-induced Dark Age period, similar to what occurred during the time of Göbekli Tepe 11,600 years ago, where they taught these hunter-gatherers or people there how to farm and agriculture, etc. So, the Bronze Age, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So we can begin to see civilization re-emerge and begin to enter this Bronze Age. And the metallurgy, or working with metals, different metals, around 5,800 years ago. Then comes this Burckle Crater impact, which possibly put a halt to this advancement until at least 1,000 years later. And then we see the sharp rise of the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Sumer, and so on within that Fertile Crescent region, roughly 5,000-ish years ago. Between 5,000 and 4,500 years ago. So what we think of as the Stone Age in the existing historical model ended around 10,000 BC and ushered in the Bronze Age. So it paints this picture of the ending of the Younger Dryas, this energetic event, this catastrophe that closed out that period, and this, I don't want to get into the ages talk today of stone, bronze, and iron, but we can see kind of this causality here going on, and we could kind of fit the picture together of going beyond just this name or finding these artifacts. What's the reasoning behind these sharp changes in the human story? So during the beginning of this SIDA period and throughout, we can see hunter-gatherer activity going on. And I may have forgotten to bring this up previously, but hunter-gatherers still live among us today in 2019. Throughout our advanced global civilization, whether it's in South America, in Africa, or the Oceania, South Asian archipelago region down there. So there's hunter-gatherer tribes, some contacted, some never contacted, who still exist today on Earth, among us, existing among us in their own little microcosm they got going on there. So it shouldn't surprise you that they're the main evidence we have of human existence following the Younger Dryas and through this solar-induced Dark Ages period. And I've discussed in previous videos the concept of the differential survival rate, about who's going to survive catastrophes in the long run or after, would it be the advanced people or these hunter-gatherers? And I've discussed the reasoning behind that. So I kind of did a quick bridge here, very briefly, and it's not exhaustive, between this Younger Dryas ending of 11,600 years ago, this solar-induced Dark Ages, about 9,000 years of it, give or take 8,000 years of it, and then we start to see this spark, this just sudden emergence of civilization about 5,000, 4,500 years ago. So this will lead me into the next topic of this Burckle Crater event. So the Burckle Crater, which is dated to approximately 3,000 BC, or about 5,000 years ago, which I've mentioned in the past, created an 18-mile wide crater 13,000 feet under the Indian Ocean onto the ocean floor. So Randall Carlson did some great work on this, and I'll link a short 10-minute video below here in the video description. And he shows some pictures and evidence resulting from this impact. And most eye-opening of these is the 600-foot plus high tsunami chevrons located in eastern Madagascar off of Africa and on the western coast of Australia. And what this is, kind of how I discussed in that previous video about the impact scars of the Younger Dryas, is we see these scars on the landscape from mega tsunamis coming in, and how it's interacting with the landscape and dropping and picking up sediment and all the interactions of it. And within these chevrons, it's dated that they're finding micro fossils, you know, from deep underwater, and these impact proxies together, dating around this time period. So this Burkle Crater event was very violent. You know, if it's an impact, whatever it was made of, dense material that flew in to our atmosphere through Earth, through 13,000 feet of ocean, to make an 18-mile wide crater below in the ocean floor. That had to be a very violent event. So to say that the world wasn't severely impacted is a complete understatement. So this event could possibly be representative of the Noah flood stories we see in the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, and many others that were recorded globally following this time period. And then we see the emergence of the Fertile Crescent civilizations, such as Sumeria. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, coming from the Sumerian legacy, it later tells the story of this incident. And there's a part in the Epic of Gilgamesh which reads as follows. Excuse me. The goddess Ishtar sends the bull of heaven to punish Gilgamesh for spurning her advances. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull of heaven, after which the gods decide to sentence Enkidu to death and kill him. So here we see the slaying of the bull, and again tying into the torrid meteor shower, as the torrid meteor shower the radiant point of it, coming as if you're looking at it in the night sky, comes from the constellation of Taurus, which is the bull. So we're seeing this bull, this Taurus thing, concept, and repeat itself, you know, and it just doesn't stop there. It continues up until, you know, 1908, where we talk about Tunguska. But throughout all of human history, and I'm going to continue to go into this. So it's estimated that the Burkle Crater impact may have killed around 80% of Earth's population at that time. 80%. 5,000 years ago, roughly, another impact happens, and 80% of the Earth's population is gone. So here we go again. Restart the clock. So following this incident, we began to see the emergence of these civilizations: Sumeria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and so on. So this ties into another, it just doesn't end. So this ties into another event, another impact, another crater, that was not too long after this Burkle Crater incident. And what I'm talking about is the al-Binni Iraq crater. So the facts about this is it's a over 2 mile wide crater in southern Iraq, in the ground. And it was created about 4,300 years ago. So about 700-ish years after the Burkle Crater incident. This al-Binni, or Iraq crater, I'll refer to it as the Iraq crater, may be related to what's known as the 2350 BC or 2350 BC Middle East anomaly, which was a natural disaster involving wildfires and floods. And at the time of the impact, this impact area that in southern Iraq was under approximately 30 feet of water. So there was impact-induced tsunamis, which would have devastated the Sumerian cities, especially along the coast. Of course, other, factors of the impact, not just water and tsunamis, but this may provide the evidence for what they find, this 6.5-foot sediment layer, which was discovered during excavation of the Sumerian city of Ur, by Leonard Woolley in the 1920s and 30s. So, descriptive passages in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written in the 1600 BC range, may describe such an impact and tsunami, suggesting this link to the Sumerian deluge, flood. It's also been proposed that the sudden climate changes and catastrophic events around this 2300 BC period could be linked to a comet or asteroid. So these are all research coming together as people are examining these different evidences around this. So using equations describing impact events based on work from Collins, Hamaker, et al., etc., and others, Hamaker determined that an impacting comet or meteor would have produced energy in the range of 190 to 750 megatons of TNT. Let me read that again. So this Iraq crater they're talking about said that the impact from this meteor, cometary body, would have produced energy in the range of 190 to 750 megatons of TNT. So for comparison, the Tunguska event, which we talked about as an airburst, 150-foot diameter airburst 5 miles above the ground, wiped out 2,000 square miles of everything. That Tunguska event had an explosive power about 10 to 15 megatons. So this Iraq crater, 4,300 BC, had an energy yield of 190 to 750 megatons. And Tunguska has 10 to 15 megatons. 200 to 700 megatons, 10 to 15 megatons. That's a huge impact on Earth. Huge, ginormous. So, the southern Iraq crater event possibly wiped out the Fertile Crescent civilizations at the time, save maybe some of Egypt, etc. And who knows how much it affected beyond the Fertile Crescent, as we're talking about the energy yield of this impact. So, I think now, as we just discussed what this kind of time frame of the solar-induced dark ages following this ending of the Younger Dryas, this thousands of year period, where you see this goddess figure in figures, sculptures, whatever you want to call it, that the hunter-gatherers were making, this renewal of Earth into an Eden-esque, garden-like, natural preserve, if you want to call it. And then, kind of you see a little spurts of people trying to start civilization, and then the Burkle Crater incident 5,000 years ago, which restarts the clock again. And then we see, anomalously, these rises of Sumeria and Egypt, etc. And that anomalous little rise there after Burkle, I'm going to touch on because it ties exactly into the ancient advanced civilizations, and this stream or river of knowledge that has been flowing underground for tens of thousands of years, at least 13,000 years. So that part there is to keep in mind. You see this Burkle Crater event 5,000 years ago, wiping out the Earth almost, 80% of it. Miraculously, right away almost, you see the rise of Sumeria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, etc. And then we have this southern Iraq al-Binni crater event 700 years after or so of that, which then wipes out the Fertile Crescent civilizations, almost, at least the momentum they had gained. So I think this is a great place to now move forward into recorded history, per se, and we could see some of these out-of-place landmarks and begin discussing the Fertile Crescent societies such as Sumeria, and then into greater examination of the ancient advanced civilizations as a whole. How these post-Burkle Crater impact societies tie in with the Younger Dryas and previous societies. So it's important, I think, to have this information in one place and set the stage going forward for what we'll be discussing about within the ancient advanced civilizations. And I think between most of these videos, you can see the severity of these catastrophes and this periodicity of them, semi-regularity of it, and how they truly have been the dominant force shaping humanity as these cosmic catastrophes. So, going forward, I'm going to try and continue to keep these discussions down to about a half hour. And, you know, now that we've kind of laid this groundwork of the Younger Dryas, the solar-induced dark ages, the Burckle Crater incident 5,000 years ago, the sharp rise of these ancient civilizations with advanced knowledge of Sumeria and Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then we see most of their demise, a large part of their demise, during this Iraq crater incident 4,300 BC, or 4,300 years ago, 4,300 years ago, excuse me, and then recorded history, if you want to call it. I mean, it was recorded at the founding of Sumeria, but, you know, then we really move into recorded history. So there's an anomaly here, if you're catching on, that after the Burckle Crater incident, which was devastating, killing 80% of the Earth's population, how all of a sudden do these societies out of almost thin air rise into this knowledge? How do you get Sumeria? How do you get Egypt? And all of the things we're going to discuss that are just out of place, you know? And some of these out of place landmarks are ancestral, like they were still there existing. Some were refurbished, if you want to call it, or rebuilt a little, or built upon. But a lot of these structures existed previous to the Burckle Crater and previous to the end of the Younger Dryas and the beginning of the solar-induced dark ages. So there's anomalies here, and this is the picture I'm trying to paint moving forward. So if we look at the work of the late John Anthony West in his documentary Magical Egypt, and he did another one, I believe, called Mystery of the Sphinx, who was, it was narrated by the actor Charlton Heston, you know, Planet of the Apes Charlton Heston, in the mid-90s. Within Magical Egypt alone, that documentary did, there's just hours upon hours of material within that documentary. I forget how long it is, but it's hours of material, hours in this documentary. And if I can impart one thing moving forward as we begin discussing these ancient civilizations, is that ancient Egypt, or early dynastic Egypt, is a key factor and a hinge point between the ending of this solar-induced dark ages, the Burckle Crater incident, and then the subsequent rise of these post-impact civilizations 5,000 years ago. And there's so much to go over with just Egypt alone, as I just said in Magical Egypt, the documentary, that it's impossible, completely impossible, to put everything into 1, 2, 3 hour videos or break that up. I mean, it's a lot of material, so it has to be spread out and interspersed with other, within context. So there's not going to be like this hour-long summary, I guess, of Egypt, you know. We can have an introduction, but just to summarize it all is impossible in a couple-hour time frame. So I believe thus far I've been able to lay enough groundwork, you know, a foundation that you can get an overall picture of the catastrophic events during the Younger Dryas and then the following transition into recorded history, and how these other impacts, such as the Burckle Crater and the al-Binni Iraq crater, come into play. And then subsequently in future videos, we'll begin to the discussion of these ancient civilizations and their founding. So this video can serve as the bridge between, kind of between catastrophes almost, you know, between the end of the Younger Dryas impact, the Younger Dryas period, 11,600 years ago, and the Burckle Crater in Sumeria and Egypt. And like I said, in future videos I'll go into more detail about some evidence and different lines of evidence, etc., within the solar-induced dark ages, of 11,600 to 5,000 years ago. But I think moving forward we can start laying this foundation and start exploring and examining the advanced ancient civilizations that arose, you know, anomalously out of thin air almost, real closely after this Burckle Crater incident. So, It's a fascinating story, and there's a lot to go over, and there's just no way I can summarize it all into one video, as you continue to see here. So I'm looking forward to now beginning to introduce this ancient advanced civilization, but we're not going to forget the catastrophes and the other evidence and material I've discussed so far. And we're going to bring in all the other research that's been done and is still being done by people such as Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Brian Forster, Dr. Robert Schoch, etc. And you could start to put together a picture of what we're looking at over human history. And when you shift your paradigm from this dogma and doctrine we've been living under to now this evidence, scientific and anomalous and, physical evidence, and putting it into that picture and that story, it all makes sense. So I think it's going to be great moving forward, and I'll look to be easing us into the ancient advanced civilizations, because there's just so much to do. And the best place I believe to start would be ancient Egypt, early dynastic period, following the Burckle Crater incident, and the Baalbek, Lebanon site, some anomalies there, and Sumer, and Mesoamerica, and just the globe. And there's just tons and tons of stuff to go over. So I hope this video was informative, and you could kind of get that picture now, that little chronological overview, major point picture of what we're looking at from the beginning of the Younger Dryas cataclysm 12,800 years ago to the start, I guess, the birth of these advanced, or these modern civilizations with advanced knowledge built into it roughly 5,000 years ago. And this is just the beginning. And I know I've touched a lot on catastrophe before, but it's the easiest, most foundational part you can lay down to build the story, because it really is the bedrock to where the human story changed 12,800 years ago. And I'm excited moving forward, seeing what we'll discuss and what we'll go into, and subsequently how this ties into the unifying principles, the human condition, current affairs, and other other topics and information and evidence that all come together to complete this picture. And I hope everyone finds value out of this, and I would appreciate it. I'd be very grateful if you'd like and share this video and subscribe to the channel, and continue to follow, because there's just a lot more to go through. And I'd be the first to admit when I'm wrong, and I'm open to all evidence. And I believe there's a lot of evidence out there, and no one person has accumulated it all. And that's part of the work that I'm doing here and others are doing. So, there's a lot of great stuff to look forward to, and I'll end this, as we kind of end the catastrophe story, per se, on a whole, and I'll say, there's nothing to be fearful or depressed about or to shy away from with catastrophes here. We need to learn this stuff, because we can do something about it in 2019. We have the technology. It's about the willpower to decide to do something about it as a whole, as a human species, to protect our planet so that we can advance and move forward and grow and do all these great positive things. So that's one of my points when I say to try and re-examine yourself, try and see how you could be a better person, and interacting with others and nature and the earth and the whole universe as a whole, because as I've laid out before, we're intimately connected, interrelated. Everything is connected. Nothing is in a vacuum, no pun intended, but I mean nothing is not interconnected in a way, whether that be the species on this earth, the planet itself, and then the planet's relation to the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and our relation within all that. So it's all connected, and it's part of this greater story I'm laying out. So I hope everyone has a great day, and look forward moving forward. Probably the next video, the next major video, will be an introduction to these ancient advanced civilizations, and most likely the easiest place to begin is in Egypt, just because that's where most of this old ancient knowledge is held the most, is still preserved the most today and throughout history. So ancient Egypt is really the repository, the place where we could go to find the most evidence and information regarding everything we're talking about. So thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video. All right, bye.